The sport of rowing is something that we can all do from ages 5 to 105. It helps train us from head to toe, helps improve our strength, our muscle mass, as well as our cardiovascular fitness. Coach Neil Bergenroth joins us today to discuss his journey of going from a rowing athlete to a rowing coach, and then pivoting when he had health issues to becoming an online coach. He's sharing his resources, he's sharing his expertise to help us become better rowers, to improve our form, and to get better times. Check out his podcast episode, learn more about what he's offering. He's an author, he runs a certification program, and he gives away great advice for free. Listen and learn why we were all born to row. Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman. I'm a family man, a coach, a wannabe athlete. After earning 3 master's degrees and countless certifications, I've decided that podcasting is how I'm going to continue my education in all things wellness, longevity, and performance. Join me to learn along.
Rowing for me started when I was 13. I was growing up in the UK, grew up in London, and I always kind of struggled to find my identity athletically when I was a kid. In England, it's like soccer. Like if you could kick a soccer ball around or you could run 100 really fast, then at that young age, you were considered an athlete. And I never could do that. I could never do the sprint, and I wasn't very good with football, right? So my dad, who was really, and both my parents were both instrumental in my development. My dad was, getting me out of bed early in the morning and taking me to the swimming pool to swim in a local swimming club. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. And from that developed a pair of lungs, like developed some aerobic capacity at a young age. Didn't really enjoy it, didn't really understand it, was kind of dragging myself through it and didn't really know how to push myself, but I was still doing those workouts and developing those lungs. And then cross country running came along. I went to a school called Kingston Grammar School in the UK, that played field hockey. And again, hand-eye, field hockey, not so great, cricket, all those other things, right? Not so great at that. But then came along cross-country running, and I was actually pretty good at that because I'd done all that swimming, right? So started to run and play field hockey for 2 years. By the time I reached the third year, which would have been the 8th grade over here, rowing became an option. And I was like, well, this field hockey thing isn't working out. So that's an aerobic sport. Let's go try rowing. And I got in a boat in Kingston upon Thames in Surrey, which is southwest London, at the age of 13. And excuse the expression, but never look back, right? Which,
Yeah.
which, was this moment where it was like I was in a boat and it was like I'd found home. I was like, okay, this is me, right? So after sort of 5 or 6 years of sort of fumbling around trying to find my place, my identity, rowing gave me something that I was good at, and I liked the aerobic end of things, the strength conditioning, the process of things. I remember going out in a single, which is a one-person boat with 2 oars. So there's sculling and rowing. This is sculling, 2 oars. Most of the rowing you see in college is sweep rowing with 1 oar and 8 people in a coxswain in a boat. And I went out in this single. Within 2 minutes, I'd flipped. And the coach came along and pulled me out of the water and grabbed the boat and drove the motorboat back to the dock. And I was like, okay, looks like I'm done. And he's like, get back in there, Neil. And I was like, what? He's like, you want me to get back in there? He's like, yes, get back in there. And so, of course, I was nervous, but I didn't want to say no to my coach. And I got back out there. And that's just one of the first of many lessons of just kind of falling down and realizing you could do something and not letting that fear guide your ultimate sort of destiny in terms of a sport. So I rowed at this school, Kingston Grammar School, for 5 years in high school, 8th grade through 12th grade, and had a ton of experiences, was able to in 1992 row on the junior national team for Great Britain in the pair. We went up to Canada that year and competed, and that was like a major milestone for me. It took me 4 years to get to that point to row internationally, and was really spoiled with my high school experience because over in England we have this race called Henley Royal Regatta, which is a huge worldwide regatta that we can all that if you're lucky enough to row at. Um, and it's on YouTube. There's a great YouTube channel. Check it out. They do a great job of all ages, all different, obviously high level rowing, but different categories. And then at that stage, like my junior year of high school, my dad said to me, "What about your college prospects?" And I said, "I don't know." And he's like, "Well, have you ever thought about America?" And I said, "Nope." And he's like, "I like the American system because it works with more people. The British system is it's almost, it works with the top 20% of people. The American system works with a much broader base. If you want access to education, you can get access to that education. You don't need to go to Harvard or Yale or Oxford and Cambridge to do that. So while the degrees maybe are not as in depth, they're a little bit wider and they work with more people. And he liked that. And I said, I'd like to broaden my horizons. And he said, that's a really good idea. So in 93, I rowed and went to Boston University on a scholarship to row there. It was a partial scholarship at the time, but it helped offset financially the cost of tuition and things like that. And I rowed between 93 and 97 at Boston University. Um, won a couple of MVPs along the way, had a great time, got a teaching degree. My degree is human movement studies, which is a Bachelor of Science, which is kind of like, a physical education degree, but it came with all the educational philosophy, the psychology. I almost have a minor in psychology, which is, I think, been very helpful for me as a coach to try to understand how people tick and to help motivate and understand. Um, and then, we did well there. And I chose Boston University because I wanted to race. My studies were not good enough to go to Harvard or Yale, but I wanted to race in that league. I wanted to race the Dartmouths, the Cornells, the Harvards, the Yales, the Northeasterns, the Browns, those kinds of that to me was the challenge that I really wanted. So that's why I chose Boston University. Plus, Boston's a great town, and you know, got that degree so graduated in 97. And then I went on to work in a boarding school for 5 years in Northwest Connecticut, and coached and taught chemistry for 5 years. If you told me I was going to end up teaching chemistry in high school, I would have laughed at you. Um, but I ended up just kind of having this science teaching and coaching approach. At which point I met this woman called Kathy, who is from Tulsa, which is where I am right now. And about 5 years on, we got engaged and we got married and we moved to Tulsa. And that was 2002. And the first thing I did before we decided to move to Tulsa was get online because they did have the web in 2002 and figure out, do they have a rowing club? And they did. And I said to her, this could work out. And ultimately got my green card. We got married and went to work for Tulsa Youth Rowing Association. And at that point, it was like 10 kids and a couple of practices a week. And I kind of coached for about a year with that sort of setup. And then after that first year, said, "Oh, let's build this community. This is a community rowing program which has served Tulsa and provide this experience, this awesome experience of rowing for everybody." And so over those years from 2002 to 2016, kind of grew that program to at one point it was 60 kids. We had a $250,000 dollars worth of equipment, had a full coaching staff. We just kind of built it. And the kids, if you're building a good culture and the kids are succeeding and they're like, okay, it's hard work, but the hard work's paying off, then it grows because they tell each other this is a good experience. We've got kids going off to college on scholarships. We've got kids that never would have had the chance to row on scholarships, those kinds of things. It's all about making the sport accessible for everybody, not just the high level kids, but the kids that can benefit from everything that rowing gives you in terms of learning how to work hard. And in 2016, I had to kind of step down from that because of some health issues. And at that point, I wasn't sure what I was going to do as a coach. But after stepping down for about 6 months, started a YouTube channel and started to build a website because I wanted to feel connected to the sport somehow, even if I wasn't coaching. And I had sort of at that point, you know, 15, 20 years of experience that I wanted to share with maybe not top level, high elite coaches. I'm not sure what I was going to teach them, but there were students coming out of college getting into their coaching careers, and I felt like I had enough knowledge to share with them in terms of how they might make that transition. I think it's one thing to be able to do a sport, it's another thing to be able to administer a team and coach athletes and communicate those skills and do it in a way that's structured and makes sense, so that everybody makes progress. So I wanted to share that, and that evolved into being an online rowing coach where I worked with somebody for free. I said, I will coach you. And they said, sure. And I met them at an indoor rowing race a couple of months before. And I said, well, why don't I coach you? And I'll coach you for free. And he was like, okay. So I coached him for 3 months and he got faster and then he started paying me. And, we've been good friends ever since. But that was kind of sort of athlete number one. And then over time, I've built apps and training systems to really facilitate online coaching. I'm big into data-driven decision making, um, among other things, but building those systems, building apps to help train athletes, to develop systems that individualize the experience for each athlete, and just, been my love of rowing has just kind of fueled all of this. And here we are in 2025, 8 years down the road, and I get invited to great podcasts like this to talk about that experience. So thank you.
Quite a journey.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
you talk about maybe the hand-eye coordination not being what you wanted to be, and so you kind of gravitated towards cross country and rowing and things like that. I think I can relate to that a little bit.
Yeah.
I was always an okay athlete, but if I wanted to win something, I usually had to just go suffer like on a run or spend extra time in the weight room, or um, it sort of it sort of trimmed my area of focus to just be more competition based versus traditional sport. So I relate to that quite a bit. Um, along with other subjects that I kind of focus on in here. Anytime I have a chance to learn or talk about youth training, I like to jump on that a little bit. And for now, if you had a time machine from age 13 to age 18 for your own self, if we had a time machine, what would you go back and make sure that you kept doing or like change altogether?
Um, I think that what has changed for me, certainly over the last 10 years, is I think, first of all, the world has changed. And in that, by saying that, I mean that kids need to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it now. Before 30 years ago, when we were coaching, it was just do as I say, and we're going to train hard all the time, and um, that will go fast just because we're working hard all the time. And now there's more nuance to it, and so I have I have a better understanding of building training programs that are have recovery built in or specific intensities built in. So, for example, like 80% of the work might be a steady state kind of aerobic type work, whereas 20% of the work would be anaerobic threshold or above VO2, those kinds of things. Um, so, my understanding of how to get somebody from A to B has changed. Um, but it's also like it's one of those things where it's a funny question because the journey really equips you with all those things and you learn, okay, what doesn't work and what does work. And, you know, it's been a case of like, okay, you know, be looking at all of those things that well you might label a failure, but I don't tend to do that because they're just learning experiences. I'm being able to build off of those and dig deeper into, but also sort of listening and not discarding your experience. I think sometimes people blow through things and they don't look back and go, well, what could have been better? So being reflective about that. And then also just understanding um, the empathy piece of coaching that I wish I understood earlier. And I think sometimes these things just develop because of life experience, where you start to understand that everybody has their own map and trying to understand that map and how coaching has evolved from a will do as I say to more of a collaborative exercise. And obviously there are different coaching styles, but you want ultimately the athlete to buy into their own process and make their own decisions. So that conversation is different where you're asking questions that are open-ended and get them to think through different things is important. Um, so um, I don't. It's a good question, but the answer is I don't think I would change very much because you sort of grow and develop. And when you're a younger coach, it's sometimes harder because if you've got a parent who's upset about something and you're 27, that's a little bit of a different experience if you've got a parent that's upset at something and you're 50, like I am right now. Like there's just this age power thing going on. And I think, if sometimes you don't get that confidence with that experience about how to handle some of these things when they disagree with a selection decision or, whatever that is. I'm seeing much less of that further on than I did when I was young and didn't necessarily know how to handle things like disciplinary situations or, the sorts of things that young coaches get challenged with. I know coaches who have quit over the way they've been treated by parents and things like that. So having that confidence and things like that, and these are things that don't show up in the coaching manuals, right? It's not just all reps and it's how to handle people. And you need to know your X's and your O's, but being able to handle people and communicate that, I think, is really the how to next level your coaching. So I hope that's a good answer to your question.
It is spoken like a positive thinker.
Yeah,
Yeah. You also mentioned like that transition to going online.
yeah.
And I didn't do any online coaching until COVID. And I was blown away at how natural it felt after the first 15 minutes.
Mm,
It's like an imaginary barrier, and then after that, you're making so much progress and getting so much good stuff done, that you forget that you forget about the old way almost a little bit. So I can relate to that as well. You mentioned being data driven and in your online coaching and your coaching approach. What data are you looking for? Are there certain KPIs that you're looking for skills, strengths, performances? Can you talk on that?
yeah, it's a great question. For me, the KPIs are have evolved over time. It's another example of how my coaching has evolved. I've had mentors who've taken an interest and said, okay, here's my system, take a look at this. So I think the first KPI is technical ability before we get into like rowing performance. So one of the things I like to do, I really enjoy doing this with my clients, is they'll send me a video of them rowing on the rowing machine or in the boat. And I will usually take 20 to 30 minutes to break down because ultimately you're trying to teach somebody how to fish. They're going to finish their coaching relationship with you at some point, but we want to empower them to understand what stroke biomechanics is so they understand why they're doing what they're doing. Back to, you can't just tell athletes, you need to explain to them now, here's why the physics of this works. So my first KPI, the first thing I do is look at their technique, which informs the drills that we do in the low rate steady state, right? Because I don't think it's like, okay, do three 20-minute pieces at 70% of max heart rate, go. There needs to be, yeah, that's our energy system, but if you're not ingraining the right habits and ingraining drills into those, that's what important. So first of all, it's, well, what's the technical model as the KPI? Now, how does that inform the drills? How do the drills inform what the steady state does? And then how do we evaluate every 2 or 3 weeks that, yeah, we're moving in the right direction? So the other thing I look at in terms of a KPI is force application. And not a lot of coaches look at this. This is a graph, you may have seen it on the concept too, that is an impulse graph basically. It's force on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And basically, it's pretty basic on the concept two, but it's there on every concept two on the PM monitor. And what it is basically it's sort of deriving based on the fan speed what the force is on the handle, and it kind of creates a haystack, right? And if force is on the y-axis and time is on the x-axis, the area underneath that curve is impulse. So depending on the rowing machine you're on the x-axis is distance. And that's work done, which is different from impulse, but it's basically the same idea. So what I'm looking at is not just physiological markers such as what's your heart rate for this amount of watts for this period of time. I'm also looking at skill acquisition. Because if you're rowing technically well, you should be getting a nice haystack in that graph that doesn't go concave anywhere along it. And, I'm sure we can get some visuals here for people to see what we're talking about. But I'm looking at that, and I've built systems where people remotely will do my workouts, and I'm recording every single one of these force curves, and then my app will bring all that data in and create an average one for a certain stroke rate for 20 strokes per minute. And I don't think a lot of coaches are really looking at that. I'd be surprised if anybody had that technology, but it's something that really, the graph does not teach you how to row correctly. It simply confirms that you are sequencing your drive and accelerating through that stroke and applying force. So that's another KPI that I look at. Other KPIs that I look at are things like peak power. So, the ATP CP system, that first 8 to 10 seconds. Um, and how much power can you generate in 7 strokes? Like typically after that period of time, that system is spent. So what I'm looking at is over 7 strokes, what's the maximum power that you can hold in watts over 7 strokes? And we can use that and correlate that with the strength training. So if the strength training is moving, if the goal is power development or, hypertrophy or race prep, there's different phases to that strength training. But if that's working, that peak power should be improving over time. And basically it's like your ceiling, right? You got to get stronger to maintain a wattage of, anywhere between 55 to 60 to sometimes 65% of that peak power for 6 to 8 minutes, depending on the athlete. So the stronger you can get, so there is some correlation with it. It's not the only thing, but it does help us. So I'm able to, built an app that does that testing, and then API it sends it over to the server. So the athlete, they used to be able to like video their screen and then have to play it back and see, because the concept 2 does not do less than 20 seconds. So, again, just building these tools to help me figure out the story behind this athlete, understand the strengths. Other KPIs I'm looking at are things like the 3-minute test, for example. Obviously, the 2K test is something to look at. The 12-minute test. If you take the 3-minute test and you take the 12-minute test, those are fixed time, just fixed not distances. They're fixed time intervals, which is better for testing than say giving somebody a 2K, because with 2K you start playing pacing games and all the rest of it, or strategies. With 3 minutes and 12 minutes, it's like just go as hard as you can for the 3 minutes or the 12 minute. So it's better to do a fixed time than it is to do a 5K or a 2K or whatever it is. But what we're taking from those, if you plot that with watts versus time, and then you linearize that data, right? You're able, I won't get into the weeds too much here, but there's a video on my YouTube channel. Perhaps we can link to it in the show notes to show people how to calculate what is called critical power. Now, critical power is the power at which, it's kind of like a switch point between your systems. And I know I've used it so far, terms like anaerobic and aerobic. We now talk in terms of oxygen utilization rather than anaerobic and aerobic. Because the way these systems work together, it's like a band playing. So you might be doing a 100-meter sprint, and let's say that your so-called anaerobic systems are the cymbals, and they're playing louder than your aerobic systems, but they're still, the drums might be the aerobic systems. So you're hearing the cymbals more, but then if you're steady stating, then you're hearing more of the drums. So if you try to think of the human physiological system as a series of instruments that are playing together and there's music
Yeah.
playing, you start to understand the nuance of what you're dealing with rather than compartmentalizing things into this is an anaerobic workout and this is aerobic workout. That is all to say that this critical power point is typically the power you can hold in watts for 30 to 40 minutes. It depends on the textbook definition. I've seen 30 minutes, I've seen 60 minutes. It's kind of similar to FTP, functional threshold power in cycling. But once you have that point, then you can start to individualize programs. So anytime you're going above that percentage, you're getting into what we call anaerobic work capacity. And this is all covered in the video, but basically it's the capacity for work above that critical power. So now you can set intervals and you can set the duration of the interval. You can set the intensity of the interval. You can set the total volume of the interval set, right? So there's all these things that go into interval workouts and what's the training intent. If the interval rest is less, then you're going more aerobically. If the interval rest is more, then you're going anaerobically, so to speak, right? So depending on what you're trying to get in your athlete, different things. So I've kind of switched over to this in the last couple of years because I think it's a more accurate and precise and individualized way of training the athlete. Um, and I've had some support from a mentor to help me learn about this, and I've had some really good results and feel I used to do things like 2K plus 10 or 2K plus 5, which is pretty generic. When you're talking about an athlete that's a 6 minute 2K versus an athlete that's an 8 minute 2K, then 2 minutes 2K plus 10 might not work for that 6 minute athlete. It might be 2K plus 6. We could get into the weeds on the numbers, but I don't think we will. But when you're looking at different energy systems, a 2K for a 6 minute is more anaerobic than a 2K is for an 8 minute rower. That becomes more aerobic. So your training should match those kinds of things. There's different workouts for different athletes. And I think sometimes clubs are taught, here's the workout for the day, and you're giving your 8:30 workout 2K is the same workout that you're giving your 6:30 2K is. Something's not quite right in the sense I know it's easier to do that, but if you've got if you're a male athlete, for example, that's rowing a 7:32K, then the emphasis needs to be on aerobic development, not necessarily doing all the sprinting work. But if you've got an athlete that's a 6:30, yeah, there's some aerobic component to it, but now we're switching into more VO2 type stuff. It's sort of all about developing progressions and what's the best thing to do for a particular athlete. And sometimes people download programs and go, yep, here it is. And while there are some general principles that are good, it's always about where is this athlete going and what do they think they need to work on too, so you get that buy-in.
Fantastic. Um, this is this might be like a short little answer, and maybe I'll just clip it out if it's as basic as it I could see it going.
Sure.
Um, you're talking about strength within their racing times. Is there any, as a strength coach, I always think about, okay, how can I remedy things in the weight room? What do you have some go-to motions that you like to prescribe for the weight room?
Yeah, I mean compound lifts are key, right? So basically when you're training for those kinds of things, um, there's the deadlift, right, is an obvious one to put in there. Um, Even though it doesn't mirror, like people go, what's the best? Is it a power clean or a deadlift? Well, the answer is none of them are specific to rowing, but what we're trying to develop is general strength, right? Yes, we want some things to be specific, but those are our go-tos. I like the front squat um, because it provides more control and there's more engagement in the core, and you're less likely to do it wrong and you can't lift as much. And I want to plug at this point a gentleman called Will Ruth, who wrote a book called Rowing Stronger. And Will's a good friend of mine. And again, I don't get any commission for recommending his book. I just generally think his book is one of the best for developing strength in the rowing arena. Um, and he and I have worked together on a couple of things. So I base a lot of my work off of that. And so he's big on the front squat. He's not very big on the bench pull, which is a horizontal bench and you're pulling the bar up because it takes away some of that core control.
Yeah,
And people tend to do it wrong, and it's not a very good. So bent over row with a barbell might be better because you're engaging your core. And I think one of the things to understand about rowing is when you're rowing on the machine, you're connected from fingers to toes all the time. And sometimes when people teach rowing, they go, what's the legs? Well, yeah, it is the legs to start with, but there's all this core activation and lat hang, and you're suspending. Suspending is a more active word than hanging, although some people use hanging. But it's the same thing with the deadlift. You pick up a deadlift, it's not like all of a sudden just your legs are working. It's your whole system. And I think once people understand, yeah, you're always connected. We take Grok, the rowing machine, right, from Heinlein, and learn, all right, the rowing machine is a system, you're a system. How do you interface with that system in a way that keeps that connection all the way through the stroke? Um, so when we think about strength training, we've got some go-tos like there's pull-ups, obviously that's a good one as well. Single leg work like Bulgarian split squats is a very good one as well. And again, doesn't require you to have a 45-pound barbell. Some of the people I work with, they don't have that. They have dumbbells. Okay, so fit the context for the athlete, whatever equipment they've got. Try to think kettlebells are awesome for rowing because they basically get your hips firing in the way that they would fire in a boat. And so therefore, and there's also some core work there as well. So those are the things that I really look for. And that's a summary. We could go on for
yeah,
forever about strength,
yeah,
and it's a whole podcast in itself for rowing. But
yeah,
um, just that recommendation, Rowing Stronger by Will Ruth, and just he's got a whole YouTube channel. He's got an exercise index with everything you could ever want to do in rowing. It's a really great resource. So I have no reservations plugging his work in today's recording.
yeah. Fantastic. Um, speaking of training and barbells versus dumbbells versus kettlebells,
Hmm.
as a non-expert rower and kind of new to it, I know that when I get on a concept two, I'm pretty happy with it. It feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Are there higher end models that rowing clubs are using that mimic it more or that are maybe a better piece of equipment? Is Concept 2 like the budget piece that the masses are using?
It's a great question. Um, honestly, like if you want to call the gold standard the concept two, you could, because for $1,000 plus or minus, that's the machine that you're going to see in pretty much every CrossFit um, or every rowing club, college, high school, masters. You're going to see Concept Twos. For the price, the durability of it, how it feels, the ecosystem of apps that are around, how to keep it, how to maintain it. The customer service for Concept Two is excellent. So, I was asked to be interviewed for a New York Times Wirecutter piece about a year or so ago, and that was one of those ones that I thought was one of the better ones. But there are other options out there as well because of COVID. When you noticed, going into COVID and going online, people realized indoor rowing was a thing, right?
Yeah.
It was before, but it was like it forced people on the rowing machine. You couldn't buy a concept tube for 4 months. Like you had to order it.
Yeah.
6 weeks, 16 weeks later, you could get it. Um, and so that sort of, obviously changed the world in terms of that. And so there are other machines as well, like the Row Perfect. It's called an RP3, which I don't mind mentioning here as well. That is a $4,000 machine, plus or minus. And it's one of these machines that's dynamic. So it goes back and forth. And so, if you're looking at a high-end rowing coaching program, like a University of Washington or a Brown or, one of these careers that's Harvard that's usually in the top 6 in the country most years, then you would classify that machine as a critical non-essential. Can you row without them? Yes, but it's all about at the top level finding all these critical non-essential things and having the money and the resources to be able to buy them. So that is a great machine as well. Um, those are the two that you would find most high-level Olympic rowers training on, right? Then there's Hydro. Hydro came out with, more of a sort of mid-market, more accessible, make rowing accessible to those that weren't necessarily trying to go for the Olympics. There's a whole demographic of people who are masters rowers. Masters rowers are sort of 25 or older. You finish college, you go row at the masters level. Their distance is 1,000 meters. It's half the distance, but there's a big community of masters rowers. This is a lifelong sport, right? This is something that you can start when you're 13, maybe a little bit younger than that, and row to you're 80, 150 years old. So it's a sport that, doesn't beat your body up. I mean, it can if you do it wrong, but not in the way that football and your knees for running might, if you're not careful, you can row, for lifelong. Find a single, find a place to row on. You can put that single out until you're, till you're, you're 80, 90 years old. Like there's people that are doing that. So um, there's obviously other machines out there like Avinroll, which is gamifying rowing, right? It's got all these games and challenges, it's got a community behind it. So anytime you're deciding on what machine to buy, you're looking at the price, you're looking at what kind of a rower are you? Are you a serious competitive rower? Are you a sort of a more recreational? I just want to fitness and wellness, keep the weight off, keep myself mentally in a good place, get a fitness regime so I'm effective at work for my family, those kinds of things. It all just depends on those sorts of things, like how loud is the machine? How easy is the upkeep? What's the price of it? What are the apps ecosystem around it? So there's lots of different variables that go into it, but to the Road Perfect is really the next level up, and the more you can get those machines, the less it's easier on the back than it is on a static machine, which is what a Concept 2 is, unless you've got the slides for the Concept 2. Um, so, that just gives you 4 or 5 examples of, and there are other lower end machines as well. But there's a sort of 4 or 5 that pop up in my mind as being, um, you know, good machines for whatever in the right context.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Well, uh, it sounds like the concept two is an accepted one. It's not a too far off the mark a little bit. So, um,
I would just say one thing about the concept too is if you are a college coach recruiting athletes out of high school, you are looking at that concept 2K, 6K score as a marker as to where this athlete is physiologically, mentally, um, to decide if you want to recruit them or not. Like that's why it's the gold standard. You're not asking for the row perfect. The coaches don't want to know about hydro. They don't want to know about Aviron. They want to know what's going on, that concept
okay.
too.
Okay.
So
That's what that,
that's why they've cornered the market as the
yeah.
standard measuring
Yeah.
tool for rowing
Okay.
performance.
Okay. Not because it's the best, it's because it's the most common almost.
Yeah, I mean, it might
Yeah.
be the
Yeah.
best, right?
Yeah.
Some might say, some might not, right?
Yeah.
That's what
Um,
my mother says. Like, some might say, some might not. It probably is one of the better ones, right?
yeah.
But it is the machine where the coach, when high schoolers are filling out that recruitment form and guaranteed there's a two, what's your best 2K and what's your best 6K on that form, that's the machine they want you to test it on.
What kind of times was a coach looking for from a high schooler?
I mean, it depends, right? If you're looking for like top level Division 1 Ivy League type stuff, you want to be going faster than 6'10". If you're looking, that's a male school. If you're looking to be recruited as a female athlete, like at a Texas, like somewhere like that, that's, national champion level rowing, 7'10", 705,
Yeah.
may even be close to 7 right now, right? I
Yeah.
mean, these are fast times. If you're looking for other programs, generally a good recruitable score for a female athlete is a 730, uh, 720, 715. Those kinds of scores will certainly open doors and get coaches interested in you. For a high school male, 630, those kinds of things. I mean, it really just depends on the program. You could get recruited, as a lightweight to a college program with a 755, 750, for example. So it depends on what level of rowing you're trying to get to,
Yeah.
um, and what college coaches are looking for. But generally, you certainly want to be faster than 8 minutes if you're a female athlete, and you certainly want to be faster than 7 minutes if you're a male athlete. And then it's sliding scale from there. Like how
Yeah.
how close can you get to 6 minutes? How close can you get to 7 minutes? And the coaches will tell you what they're looking for. So I mean that's generally the times. It's a scale depending on, and also I want athletes to make sure that don't just go Division 1 because you like the sound of going Division 1. There are some great Division 2, Division 3 Dadville programs, Accra programs out there as well. Um, that if you're looking for engineering at Michigan, for example, like that could be a good fit if you're a rower and you want to go to Michigan, right? So I think sometimes people get locked into, well, I want to go Division 1, and they lose an opportunity that could be a better fit for them because they're not looking at these other programs which also have great club experiences, that would be a better fit academically as well.
Um, with you mentioned a sliding scale of performance times.
Yeah.
It made me think of again, this might be another like really rudimentary question and is like
No, you're
something
good.
some type what's the sweet spot for the damper? What in like a nutshell, how do you coach your damper setting?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's a whole table, and I can send it to you after the podcast that I got from a British website. Um, but generally speaking, like for a male athlete, somewhere between 120 to 125 on the drag factor. So when you turn on that machine, you're actually not looking really at the handle on the side of the machine, which goes from 1 to 10, as I'm sure you're familiar. Um, I do this whenever I run a rowing clinic, right? I say, okay, everybody set their damper on 5, and I have them row. You can on the PM monitor, you can press buttons to show the drag factor, which is basically the deceleration of the wheel. So whenever this, whenever the handle goes up more, there's more of the fan exposed. So there's more air getting in, so it slows down a little bit quicker, right? So it feels heavier when you pick it up at the front end at the beginning of the stroke. And what I do with these camps to usually the CrossFit camps, and I show them, okay, every set yours to be about 5. And then I say, row 10 strokes and set this up. And then tell me what your drag factor number is. And we get numbers anywhere between like 110 and one, one 140 or something like that. My point being that as these machines wear out and they get lint and they, depending on the older they get, the harder it is to get that drag factor higher by pushing up. You have to push up the damper higher. So a 5 on one machine might be the same thing as a 4 on another machine. So that's really your litmus test. And once you've got that, if you're a male athlete, of 100 and 170 pounds, 180 pounds, for example, to pick a number, then you're rowing 120 to 125. If you're a female athlete, maybe it's 110 to 115. Like I said, I can give you the table in one of my slideshows for one of my clinics, and you can use that as a general guide. But depending on what you want to be doing, if you're trying to build power at low rate on certain workouts, like for example, there's a workout that I do that's 8 2-minute pieces with 3 minutes of rest in between them, and I set the max rate for an athlete to be 20 strokes per minute. So basically, they're rowing 40 stroke pieces, but the drill is designed to take rate off the table. There are 3 factors that control how fast you're going. It's the length of your stroke, the cadence of your stroke, or the strokes per minute, and the power you're putting in. But if you take off rate off the table and artificially put a ceiling there and say, okay, I want you to go as fast as you can and build as much torque and connection on that machine at that low rate, you're not strength training here, just to be clear, but you are learning how to apply rate at low rates. And I basically might push the drag factor up a notch or two to
Yeah.
create a little bit more resistance on that. But obviously, depending on the athlete, and we don't want to blow their back out and things like that. Typically when you get to a gym, you see things at 10 because people don't understand how to do things technically. And that's kind of a big thing in the rowing world, that people post things in the Facebook groups. Look what I found in the gym, and like it's funny, but it's not funny in the sense that you know, um, we want people to get on that machine and row well, so they don't have to put that drag factor up to 10 to feel like they're getting connection and feel like they're getting some work done with their rowing.
Yeah. Um, we do for a lot of sprint-based athletes or field athletes. We'll often do uh, resisted runs.
Yeah,
Um, for it just slows it down a little bit. It lets them connect to it, and then you get rid of that weight later on, and they fly.
yeah,
So, um, uh, while I am um, haven't experimented with that method you just had, it seems like familiar territory,
yeah.
and it's something that works fantastically well. So. Um, we talked about the aging athletes a little bit. We don't have to go into that too much, but it just seems more lately that I keep seeing these uh, both anecdotal studies and research studies that are looking at older athletes, and that rowing is one of the things that keeps them in this one of the it's making them younger almost, is that their hearts are healthy, their postures are better, they have muscle mass. And when you kind of think about rowing versus the other activities of like cycling versus running versus this, that, and the other, you start thinking, okay, rowing's pretty safe way to push yourself hard and get strong from head to toe. And is there and you mentioned that there's the Masters will race at, did you say 1K instead?
One K is the on the
Um,
water, on the water assessment. They're still doing 2Ks at the indoor rowing competitions,
yeah,
but when they go to Masters Nationals, which is in, I believe, August or September, it's 1K. So it's not the 2K Olympic distance that we're used to.
yeah. Um, but for me, the more I look at it, I just think, yeah, like be strong from head to toe, have a healthy heart, do some power output because as we age, the number one thing that starts to fade off is our speed and our power output. So to be on something where you're almost doing like a resisted jump as you pull pull on that handle and get back as fast as you can. There's a safe ability to apply power and to have a high intent. So I'm kind of excited for lots of reasons for my older clients that I talk to. Kind of just remind them, hey, you might want to play around with that rower a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, keep your knee happier, get you stronger, everything like that. But it seems to be like almost like the antidote for aging for a lot of people. Um, do you have any thoughts on grip strength? You know, that sport is unique in that you're hanging on to something for so long, and you're yeah. I'd just love to hear any thoughts you have on grip.
Yeah, I mean, grip is an important part of this, although, I don't like to use the word grip. If I use the word grip, there's a subconscious going on in the athlete that where they tighten that they're holding that handle too tight, right? So, I say enclose the old handle, right? And I describe it in terms of imagine that you're holding a small bird in your hand and you don't want to let that bird go, but you don't want to hurt that bird either. So that gives people a sense of like, okay, that's the amount of pressure that I should be using around this handle. Um, in college, I used to have an issue with cramping forearms, like especially like in headwind weather when I was rowing and a lightweight oar. Sometimes when the oar is lightweight and you're controlling it in the wind, you are actually holding on to things a little bit tighter than you should do, and you get these very tight forearms halfway through the race. So what I was doing was trying to figure out ways like so first of all potassium was at a good level, was I hydrated, those kinds of things, a couple of things there, but then doing things like tennis ball squeezes, doing wrist roller exercises, just winding up and down, a 5 pound weight, wrist curls, those kinds of things, farmer carries, those kinds of things. And then, thinking about, okay, is that moving the needle in terms of like, is my, the way I'm holding the oil handle being compromised by a strength deficiency, or am I at a good place, or are my forearms holding up here in what could be a 15 to 20 minute race? Like in the fall, the races are 3 to 5K. In the spring, the races are 2K, could be less depending on what you're rowing. So obviously, the longer you're rowing in these head races, the more that becomes important to strengthen. Um, and also just incorporating enough rest into your program as well so that you're not running into problems with that. I don't know how many coaches keep that in their programs and consider it. It is a factor. Is it the main thing to do? I don't know, but it's still an important factor in terms of preventing injury, not getting tennis elbow. Some of that is technical, some of that is way how you're drawing the end of that stroke. Um, and so some of that gets fixed with good, just technical feedback and making those changes.
Yeah. Do you ever play around with I personally, I do some rowing, but not so much that it's like altering my uh, muscle tissue length or anything like that. So I get kind of tight through some of my flexors down here,
Yeah.
and I'll kind of feel it through my hands. So what I did is I bought it's like this rubber webbing, and you put your fingers in and you open up against
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever played around with anything like that.
I've not seen that, but if
Yeah,
you have
so.
a link you could share after the podcast, that'd be great.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And they're cheap too. I mean, I'm really happy with the investment. Just for me, I won't go into it, but I did a like a backyard project one summer, like laying a bunch of rock, and so much of it was just like using my hands. Uh, that something tightened up in there, and I didn't realize it for multiple years. So I quit. I thought I was getting arthritis, so I quit doing farmer carries and grip strength because every time I did that, it would exacerbate that tightness sensation. So I quit doing that for years. And then one day I was messing around with something and I just found some really tight tissue in there and I started doing more stretching and like it cleared up. And so
Yeah,
I went back to grip work. Now I've just learned about myself that I'm prone to getting tight through there. And I do that hand opener and it makes that grip, makes this hand just feel way better.
good.
And I was talking about it to my with another coach, Aaron Rhodes. He works in the Major League Baseball as a strength coach, and he said that they were doing some hand extension work with their pitchers, and he said that their grip strength, instead of getting weaker throughout the season and getting worn down, that by dropping in some reverse motion,
Yeah,
like hand extension, he said their grip strength actually was getting better. That is like to flex. So it's something that works for me, and I heard one good story from a fellow coach as well. So um, yeah, just put that in your back pocket.
it kind of makes sense though. I mean, we talk about, you know, was it P and F stretching where you're flexing the quad and stretching the hamstring? Like these systems work symbiotically. So it seems like if you're having problems with this and you strengthen that, the opposites tend to work against each other. Now, I may be totally wrong on that, but it does seem to make some sense with some other techniques that are prevalent.
If you're wrong, we're wrong together.
Okay, beautiful.
Um, and if we can get more people to be wrong with us, then we'll be right. Um, how about so? And grip strength is related to your heart rate variability, which is basically your nervous system state of readiness. Um, and in the weight room, I know that if I lift certain amounts of weights, I'm going to be biting into the nervous system a little bit. I'm going to be
Yeah,
setting it back.
yeah.
One thing that I was curious about is, do you have an opinion on, well, if you row this hard, you'll be fine to row again the next day at a similar or greater intensity. But at what point do you notice that your nervous system is being mitigated for for training the next day? Like how hard is so hard that you know that the nervous system has taken a little bit of a beating?
Yeah, I mean it's we're lucky in this day and age where most of my clients have heart rate variability on their watches, so we're able to look at things and
Yeah.
know, yeah, we're training too hard. Um, I actually just built some of this training stress score into my systems where what I was trying to do was say, okay, if this is your critical power, where are you relative to this for how long? And come up with a score number for how stressful this training is in your training. So, you know, I've got a client who's going to do a very, very long distance row at the end of the year. And, just leave that there. But we're talking thousands of miles over many days. And that requires us to really watch this because you could go into overtraining and rib stress fractures and rib stress injuries and things like that if you're not watching that carefully. So, what I'm generally looking for is, with all of my clients doing really everything with a heart rate monitor. So, we're monitoring that. If I'm looking at steady state work, then everything I'm doing with them is tracking that. So, for example, if we're doing two 20-minute pieces, which is kind of 40 minutes, kind of a low end of steady state, for a competitive athlete, what I'm doing is watching the heart rate versus the average watts for the session and actually calculating something which I call a fitness index, which is the average watts divided by the heart rate. And, I'm watching that over time. Um, and you have to be a little bit careful because of external conditions, because sometimes a hot room can decouple output with input, right? So your heart rate could be 10, 15 beats higher if you dehydrated, or or the room's too hot, especially during the summer and it's not well air conditioned, you're going to get a false result. But I'm looking at that and going, okay, is that overall over a few weeks going in the right direction in terms of are they creating more watts for the same heart rate? Therefore, without even doing a 2K, we know we're getting the aerobic systems are improving, they're becoming more efficient. When I start to see that go in the wrong direction, I start asking questions for the client about what are you feeling, what's going on right now. Sometimes they're in a very busy period of work. Sometimes they haven't slept well. Like all these variables go into ultimately performance. And I think that's what a lot of coaches battle is they have these athletes for 2 hours a day, but they don't control them the other 22 hours a day. So what decisions are they making outside of the gym or the erg room or the river? And so part of that is teaching them how to make those good choices. But that is going back to that. That is what I'm looking for. Plus, it's also like building your training progressions. You know, your microcycles, your macrocycles. Like, what is the training intent here, and are we increasing training load appropriately? I generally do like a 4 week cycle where we go one, two, three, and each week there's a little bit more. And then the fourth week we do 50% of the work or 80% of the work, depending on what we're doing. And then the fifth week we're testing. So we're going bump, 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 and then back off, taper a little bit. Not necessarily take the intensity out, but just take the volume down to 50%. So we're keeping everything sharp. We're not losing fitness. Um, and I think that's key. There's a book called Training with a Power Meter by one of the I think his name is Dr. Andrew Coggan, and I think these are the guys that did Training Peaks or that kind of platform. And he says that performance is equal to fitness um, minus freshness, or fitness plus freshness, right? So, it's like the Tour de France, right? At the end of the Tour de France, they're exhausted. They've been cycling for a month, but they're probably quite fit. But the fatigue level is so high that maybe they're not really, they're doing their fastest cycling. So anytime you're training somebody, you're going, how do we keep fitness improving, but be aware of this other variable here called, that fatigue factor, right? If we've got, low fatigue, it's subtracting less from the fitness and our performance is better. If that makes sense. So you're always looking at those things to determine we've done the training, but we're not getting any faster. I think a lot of coaches sometimes think, well, we do more. And they're like, maybe the answer is doing less. And, building in that recovery so the body can mend itself, so the mind can refresh, all of those factors in. So hopefully that's a good answer to your question.
It is. And one more kind of an offshoot. Do you guys ever play around with post-activation potentiation? Do you ever do any kind of like a heavy lift prior to a race or anything to really prime that nervous system a little bit for like the day of?
That's a good question. It's not something I've done that much, to be honest with you, but maybe you can explain kind of how you've used it in your context. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's something you can expand upon for the listeners.
Sure. So the idea is that we have our brain. Our brain connects to our muscles with motor neurons, and not all motor neurons are activated just walking around. You have your morning coffee, you're going around your normal day, and as you start warming up and you start lifting lighter weights, and then your body all of a sudden it wakes up more motor neurons, and then you get almost stronger over the course of a 20 or 30-minute window as your nervous system is just activating. No new muscle fibers. You're not on like there's no crazy. There's not your child is not trapped underneath a car or anything like that. Your nervous system is just starting to wake up a little bit. Um, as you gradually lift a little bit heavier and heavier and heavier, more of those motor neurons get activated, and that gives you more access to more muscle fibers. If I was to do if I was to do maybe if I was going to do like a 500-meter row for a race right now, and it was really important to me, or if I was going to try to kick some butt on a short distance motion, whether it's a 500-meter row or maybe a 400-meter sprint or a 100-meter sprint. Um, a non-fatiguing trick that we use sometimes is to get our athletes to lift something moderately heavy for really low reps. So you're gonna go in and lift something like 85 to 90% of what you're capable for the day, but you're only gonna do like one rep. And so you're not tired, but your
Mm.
nervous system had somebody went in, it's like somebody went in and flicked on the motor neurons, and so you have access to more muscle fiber.
That's great. That's very interesting. Um, I wonder if, in the show notes you could include a link or two to some resources for people, because I will admit that's not something that I do a lot of, but I do work with people who are trying to row the 500 meters
Yeah,
at the World Indoor. And so
yeah,
you spend your whole career as high schoolers teaching them to row the 2K. You're not spending a whole lot of time learning about the 500 meters, but there's a different training approach to that. That I bought a course on. One of my clients was, hey, this is really cool course. So I was learning lots of different techniques and expanding my knowledge in training for a 500-meter sprint, where there's a big population of people who that's their thing, right?
yeah,
It's like you said earlier, or alluded to earlier, like when your sport chooses you rather than you choose your sport. Like you figure out genetically, where are my strengths and where do they fit well. And for me, that was rowing and aerobic. For you, that was just a more competitive, and that, it's very hard if you're a sprinter to become a long distance runner and do well at that, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. I'm not discouraging people from doing that, but sometimes the 2K isn't the event for somebody and it's the 500 meters, and there's an avenue to express that athleticism that does it. You don't need to be the 2K athlete. If you're really good over 100, 150 meters, then let's work to improve peak power and do that. So I think it's interesting.
yeah. I would say just like brainstorming before I move on from that, I would say probably like a trap bar pickup would be something you're getting a leg press, you're getting
Yep.
some grip involved, you're getting some upper back and core involved. So if anybody's listening and wants to experiment with it, that'd be like one of the top motions I would probably play around with. Again, I have never coached anybody on that. But I have rode and lifted on the same day, and I've kind of felt some effects of that. So, um, yeah,
There is something to that, and I'm not suggesting this is lift for everybody because it's quite hard to do, but I've really enjoyed power cleaning over the years. I don't lift anymore because of my heart issues, but when I was in high school, like I found that power clean for me to be much more effective than the deadlift, mainly because it was a greater range of motion and I felt like I was getting more core and sort of front strength with that. So whenever I got on the erg, when I was doing that power cleaning, I felt a lot more powerful than I was getting out of a deadlift. But that's my own personal experience, and
yeah,
certainly not something that necessarily I want to write a research paper on, but it's just been my experience is I've gotten more out of that lift than the deadlift.
good to know. Very interesting. I have to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So call this podcast the Winning Wellness Podcast.
Yeah.
And essentially that's two sides of the same coin. Some people are not uh, in a position to be competitive or to pursue stereotypical goals. Some people just need to win back their wellness.
Hmm.
They're in poor health, whether it's state of disease, fatigue, they're not feeling well, obesity, whatever it is. And then the other side is a more standard athlete who's trying to reach goals, whether it's championship or scholarship or whatever. Um, with the idea of winning wellness, do you have one or maybe two things that we haven't talked about that you would say that you want to advertise to people to take into their day-to-day lives to try to win their wellness?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't talked about it, but it's the sleep and recovery aspect of things. Um, you know, it's understanding that fundamentally what we're doing is breaking the body down and putting it into a weaker state so that it builds itself up stronger. And so unless you're building in that sleep and that recovery, and prioritizing that, it makes it so much harder to do. Um, and then, I think sometimes, I teach at a local high school, and a lot of what I'm doing is stress management and weight control. So even though I've been a competitive athlete for many years, coached competitive athletes, my goals now changed after those heart surgeries. And now I'm quite happy to row five 2K pieces on the rowing machine at a 70% of max heart rate, which is the ideal heart rate for me to maximize stroke volume and fat metabolism. So I'm targeting that energy system. Plus, it's not so mentally taxing, and really steady state done right should feel like, okay, if I've done 40 minutes on the erg, I could probably do another 20, but I'm not going to. Then you've probably steady stated correctly at that heart rate zone. So it becomes more and more critical to understand how the body physiology works and do heart rate controlled stuff so that sustainability. When you look at a lactate curve for a highly competitive athlete, a lot of the mistakes they make is they do steady state. They think they're doing steady state, but actually they're doing low grade anaerobic threshold work, which is kind of the middle part of the energy system. And they do it for a while. It works for, a period of weeks, and then burnout starts to set in because ultimately the lactate levels in the blood are too high. And so it's a lot harder for a competitive athlete to do this right than it is a athlete that is not as fit, or a recreational athlete, because your body tells you very quickly that you're out of shape, so you back off. But if you're building physiology that's clearing lactate more effectively, the danger is that you can, and danger is sort of a heavy word here, but we want athletes to be able to train for months and months and months without that burnout. So knowing what benefit you can get if you're rowing on that machine for 40 minutes at a 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 intensity, you're burning fats, which is what you want to do, but you're also making it enjoyable, which I think is also key to long-term health, rather than getting into a 2K program that you downloaded from somebody on the internet and trying to do that. Um, I think there are things, and also mixing it up, cycling, swimming, like mixing the modes, getting into a yoga class, doing some meditation. Like these are all things that help to quiet the mind, give you balance, that I've personally found very helpful to me at this age and at this stage of my career.
Yeah, we often forget it's important to enjoy what you're doing.
Exactly.
If you're going to stick with it to become any kind of proficient, that usually takes long enough that you need to have that enjoyment aspect. Um,
Yeah, it's process, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's like you have to enjoy that process. Otherwise, it's like my AP chemistry students who I used to teach a few years ago. When on the last day of class, I asked them, "Do you still like chemistry?" And if the answer is yes, I still like chemistry, then regardless of what that score is on that AP exam, you've kind of done your job. But if you're teaching them to get a 5 on the AP and two-thirds of them can't stand chemistry by the time you're done, I'm not sure what's been achieved, because you've not played the long game with that student, right? And always, my dad used to say, always play the long game, Neil.
yeah,
And so if they're not enjoying that process, um, that's tough. It's got to be, and there's points that are hard. There's no doubt. It's not all going to be, you know, easy sailing. But I think the great thing about coaching kids, adults, is when they do something that they didn't think they could do, and you're like, yeah, you see, you could do that. and getting
Yeah.
people to amaze themselves constantly about what their capabilities are, because often we downplay what we're able to do, and sometimes we need somebody outside of us to show us what we can do, and that's our role as coaches, to get people to that point.
Yeah. My, my daughter's capable of riding a bike right now, but she doesn't think she can.
Yeah,
So we're having a discussion on that. So,
yeah,
but we were getting some high fives out of her for her performance yesterday. So we're making progress.
yeah.
Um,
That's awesome.
is there anything we haven't talked about today that you'd like to bring up, or that we
Um,
sh or that is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
I don't know. I think we talked about a lot of different things. You know, I I don't know if people know how to get a hold of me or what some of the programs that I offer.
Yeah.
Would that be helpful?
That'd be great. Please.
Okay. I'm on the web. My website is coachbergenroth.com. I'm sure we'll link to it in the notes. I'm also on Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel with 150 videos about how to learn properly, some of the ways that I coach. So it's just there, it's there for people. There's no expectation of anything in return. Just sharing my love of the sport. Um, and I coach people all over the world, various different levels of experience, various different goals. So I don't specialize to people who just want to make the Olympics or rowing college. I actually have a number of clients who kind of middle-aged, who are busy business careers, but want to find an hour a day to do better on the erg or set themselves a long-term goal, those kinds of things. So, work with eighth graders, so all kinds of age levels. And I also have it's called the Novice Rowing Coach Accelerator. And it's just starting off, and I'm building curriculum for that. But I worked with one client who was a novice rowing coach, and we would just, he would come to me with questions the week before, and we would sit and talk about what they needed to know, from building training plans to progressions to technique to handling parents. So anything that sort of is under the realm of coaching. So I'm excited to kind of build that program and launch that program as well. So it's just an overview of what I do, and I'm just happy to still be involved and be able to talk about things I like to talk about.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Winning Wellness Podcast. Please keep in mind that all views expressed within the show are not a reflection of any universities or organizations that I may be affiliated with. If you have any questions or suggestions for future shows, please reach out through Instagram, where I can be found with the title name of Mitch Schwartzman.